The scaffold came down with a sound like the sky tearing open, and Adra Highcliff was already moving before the dust settled. She had been 3 switchbacks below on the cliff road when she heard the crack of timber and the scream of rope tearing free from stone, and by the time she crested the last ramp into the quarry yard of Ashcrag, half the settlement was already screaming for blood. A crowd had gathered around the wreckage of the east scaffold, orc and human alike, and in the center of that crowd, pinned against a stack of cut granite blocks by 3 men with quarry hammers raised, stood a human she did not yet know by name. He was tall and broad through the shoulder in the way of men who had spent their lives hauling stone, his dark hair matted with dust and blood from a shallow cut above his brow, and he was not fighting them. That was the first thing she noticed. He stood with his hands open at his sides, palms out, not because he was afraid but because behind him, half buried in broken timber, lay the body of Crug Stonejoe, foreman of the Eastern Terrace and cousin to 3 separate clan houses. "He cut the ropes," a woman was shouting, an old quarry hand with flour still on her apron. "He cut them himself. I saw him up there not an hour past. Tell them what you did." "I didn't cut anything," the man said, low and rough, not raising his voice even as a hammer came within a foot of his skull. "I built that scaffold. I checked those lines myself this morning." "Liar," someone else spat, and the crowd surged, and Adra saw the moment the first hammer began its true swing. She did not shout a warning. She had learned long ago that warnings were wasted breath in a mob. Instead, she crossed the last 20 feet of quarry yard at a dead run, orc muscle eating the ground, and caught the hammer haft in her bare hand, a hand's width from the man's temple. The wood cracked under her grip. The quarryman who had swung it stumbled back, more from shock than force, and found himself staring up into the yellow eyes of a Highcliff huntress with her tusks bared and her twin hand axes still strapped to her hips, unneeded. "The next person who raises a weapon against an unjudged man," Adra said, and her voice carried across the whole yard the way thunder carries across a valley, "answers to Highcliff clan law. Not town law, not mob law, clan law. And I promise you, it is a colder judge than any of you." The yard went silent but for the settling of dust and the distant creak of the great quarry crane, still swinging its empty hook over the pit. She turned finally to look at the man she had just saved and found him already looking back at her with an expression that held no gratitude at all, only a kind of tired, wary steadiness, as though he had expected to die a moment ago and was now recalculating. "Victor Ramsey," he said before she could ask. "I built the scaffold. I didn't kill him." "I did not ask," Adra said. "You were going to." She almost smiled. Almost. Instead, she crouched beside the wreckage, ignoring the crowd still muttering at her back, and began, with careful orc hands, to examine the ropes that had failed. Ashcrag clung to the side of a granite cliff, the way a limpet clings to a hull, its terraces cut in shelves down toward a quarry pit so deep that the men working the bottom looked like insects from the rim. Cranes of oak and iron chain hauled blocks up in stages, from pit floor to first terrace to second, and where the natural stone would not bear a road, the town had thrown up bridges of fitted rock, arched and narrow, so that the whole settlement was less a town than a woven basket of stone and timber and rope, all of it dependent on things holding when they were supposed to hold. It had been built, 40 years past, on a treaty between the human settlers who wanted the granite and the Highcliff clan who claimed the cliffs as ancestral ground. The treaty held because both sides needed it to hold. Humans quarried the stone that fed half the kingdom's forts and bridges. Orcs took a third share of the yield and, more importantly, kept the peace between the two peoples living cheek by jowl on a cliff face where one bad fall, one bad blow, one bad word, could kill a man just as easily as a blade could. That was where Adra came in. She was not a soldier of the Highcliff clan, not truly, though she could fight as well as any of their warband. She was a lawkeeper, sworn to settle blood price before blood price became war, to walk into exactly this kind of wreckage, exactly this kind of mob, and find the truth before grief could turn it into a massacre. She had done this work for 9 years. She had never once in 9 years felt the ground shift beneath her the way it did when Victor Ramsey knelt down beside her at the ruined scaffold, uninvited, and pointed with a scarred, calloused finger at the frayed end of the support rope. "Look at this," he said quietly so the crowd would not hear. "That is not a rope that wore through. Look how clean the last inch is. That was cut." Adra had already seen it. She had seen it and said nothing, because a lawkeeper who spoke her conclusions before she had gathered every thread was a lawkeeper who could be manipulated. But she looked at him now, this stonemason with blood drying on his temple, who had just watched his foreman die and nearly been killed by his own neighbors, and who was nonetheless thinking clearly enough to point out evidence that might save his own neck. "You noticed that quickly," she said. "I have looked at a lot of rope in my life," he said. "I know when it fails honest and when someone has made it fail, and yet the crowd believes you did the cutting." Something moved behind his eyes, old and tired. "Crowd believes what is easiest. It is easier to believe the mason who built the thing was careless or cruel than to believe someone climbed up in the night and cut it on purpose. I understand why." He looked at her directly then, and there was no fear in it, only a strange, exhausted honesty. "You are the one who has to decide which is true. I'm not going to waste your time asking you to like me for it." Adra Highcliff had spent 9 years listening to men lie to her face while pretending to be brave. She had rarely, if ever, heard a man tell her the truth while pretending to be nothing at all. She stood, brushing granite dust from the fitted dark leathers she wore, armor cut close to her body, reinforced across the chest and shoulders with overlapping plates of hardened hide, cinched at a waist that would have made a human woman's corset maker weep with envy, the whole of it worn soft and supple from years of hard use, with her twin hand axes riding low on a wide belt, and a coil of her own rope slung across one shoulder for climbing the cliff paths. She was taller than Victor by half a head, green-skinned and broad-shouldered, with tusks that had been filed smooth by her own hand years ago so they would not catch on climbing ropes, and a long braid of black hair bound with iron rings that marked, to anyone who could read Highcliff signs, that she was clan-sworn and unmarried. "I am taking custody of this investigation," she announced to the yard, loud enough to carry. "The mason Victor Ramsey will be held under my authority, not the town's and not the mob's. Anyone who touches him before I have finished answers to Highcliff law. Is that understood?" There were mutters. There was no argument. 9 years had taught the settlement of Ashcrag exactly how far Highcliff patience extended, and exactly how quickly it ran out. She looked down at Victor Ramsey, who was watching her with that same steady, unreadable calm, and felt something in her chest she did not have a name for yet, something that unsettled her far more than the mob had. "Come with me," she said. "You are going to show me every inch of that scaffold and every hand that touched it, and you are going to do it before nightfall. And if I refuse, then I drag you," she said, "and it will hurt considerably more." For the first time since the scaffold fell, Victor Ramsey almost smiled. They spent the next 3 days together in a way that neither of them had chosen, and both of them, if pressed, would have admitted they did not entirely mind. Adra installed herself in the small stone workshop Victor kept at the edge of the second terrace, a low building thick with the smell of chalk dust and tallow, its shelves lined with chisels and plumb lines and half-finished templates for the wells he had dug for 3 different quarters of the town. She slept, when she slept at all, in a hard chair by the door, her axes never more than an arm's length away, and she watched him the way a hawk watches a field mouse it has not yet decided is prey. He did not seem to mind the scrutiny. He went about his days as though a Highcliff Huntress were not sitting in the corner of his workshop measuring his every word for lies. He repaired a section of the terrace wall that had begun to crack. He inspected, at her insistence, every scaffold still standing across the settlement, and found, on the third one, another rope cut in the same clean, deliberate way, hidden beneath a fraying overlay meant to look accidental. "Someone wanted it to look like my carelessness," he said, holding the cut end up to the lamplight in his workshop that evening, his brow furrowed in something that looked less like fear for himself and more like grief for Krug Stonejaw. Whoever did this did not care that Krug would die. They only cared that it would look like I killed him. Who would want that? Adra asked. I do not know. He set the rope down carefully as though it were something sacred. I have lived in this town 11 years. I have never made an enemy that I know of. I keep to myself. I build what needs building. I do not involve myself in the town's arguments about ore rights or grazing lines or who insulted whose grandmother at the spring fair. He looked up at her. That is not modesty, Huntress. It is simply true. I have no one who hates me enough for this. Then perhaps, Adra said slowly, feeling the shape of a suspicion she did not yet want to say aloud, it was never about you at all. She had not told him yet about Gulnak Thornhide. It was on the fourth evening, as she watched him bind a poultice around the hand of an old quarry woman who had scraped it badly hauling a bucket, that Adra Highcliff first noticed the thing that would, in the end, undo every wall she had built around her own heart. He did not know she was watching. She had come to fetch him for another round of questions about the scaffold, and found him instead kneeling in the dust of the lower terrace, murmuring something low and patient to a woman easily 70 years old who was weeping not from pain, but from fear that the wound would take her hand's strength, and with it her livelihood. Victor's voice, when he spoke to her, held none of the flat weariness he showed the mob, none of the guarded steadiness he showed Adra herself. It was gentle in a way that asked for nothing in return. It will heal, he told the old woman. I have set worse. You will curse me for making you keep it wrapped a full week, but you will keep your grip, I promise you that. You cannot promise such things, Mason, the woman said, half laughing through her tears. No, he agreed, but I promise to sit here until you believe me anyway. And he did. He sat in the dust of the terrace, in full view of no one who mattered, in front of an old woman who could do nothing for him and nothing to hurt him. And he was kind to her with the same unhurried tenderness Adra had begun, despite every instinct trained into her by 9 years of lawkeeping, to crave from him herself. Adra stood at the edge of the terrace a long moment before he noticed her, and in that moment she understood, with the clarity of a blade going into wood, that this man was not performing decency for her benefit. He had no idea she watched. He was simply, entirely this. She had met warriors who were gentle with their own kin and monstrous to strangers. She had met lords who were generous in public and cruel behind closed doors. She had never, in 9 years of reading men for the lies beneath their skin, met one who was exactly the same in an empty street as he was in a crowded square. That night, she did not sit in her chair by the door. She sat closer to the low fire in his workshop, close enough that when he came in from binding the old woman's hand and found her there, he stopped in the doorway and looked at her the way a man looks at weather that has changed without warning. You are still investigating me, he said. It was not quite a question. I am, she said, but it occurs to me that I have not asked you about that. She nodded toward the old, thick scar that ran from his collarbone up along the side of his throat, pale and long-heeled, half hidden beneath his shirt collar. She had noticed it the first night and said nothing, out of habit more than courtesy. Something shifted in his face. That is an old one. Among my people, Adra said, a scar is not shown to strangers. It is shared when it is shared at all, only with someone we trust to hold the true story of it without using it against us. It is one of the few honors we do not waste. She held his gaze. I am not asking as your judge tonight. I am asking as myself. He was quiet a long moment, and she thought he might refuse, and found that the thought of his refusal disappointed her more than it should have. My father was a mason too, he said finally, sitting across the low fire from her, close enough that the light caught the dust still in his hair. He taught me everything I know about stone and rope and weight. When I was 17, a support beam gave way on a bridge we were building over the western ravine. He pushed me clear. He did not push himself clear in time. He touched the scar without seeming to notice he did it. A length of chain caught me across the throat as I fell. I have carried it ever since. I finished that bridge myself 2 years later alone, because I could not bear the thought of anyone else building it wrong and having it fail the way it failed him. Adra did not speak for a long moment. The fire popped between them. "I have a scar," she said at last, and drew back the sleeve of her leathers to show a long pale line across her forearm, old and thin. "I earned it the year I was made lawkeeper. There was a warband leader named Gulnak Thornhide who broke a blood truce during a dispute I was sent to settle. He killed a man under parley, a thing our law names unforgivable. I was the one who brought judgment against him. He fought me rather than accept exile. I won. He did not die, because our law does not permit killing a kinsman for cowardice, only exile for it. He has hated me every day since, and I do not doubt he still lives somewhere in the wild clan lands, nursing that hatred like a coal he refuses to let go cold." Victor looked at the scar, then at her face, with none of the pity she had braced herself for, only a kind of quiet respect that felt absurdly like being touched. "Thank you for telling me," he said simply. "Thank you for telling me," she answered, and found that she meant it more than she had meant anything in a very long time. It was 2 nights later that she found the mark. She had gone back to the wreckage of the fallen scaffold alone, in the gray hour before dawn, to search once more through the debris for anything the daylight crowds might have trampled or stolen. Beneath a splintered crossbeam, half buried in granite dust, she found a small carved token of bone, no bigger than a thumbnail, etched with a jagged sigil she had not seen in 9 years, and had hoped never to see again, the broken tusk mark of Gulnak Thornhide's exiled warband. She stood in the cold quarry dawn holding that small bone token, and felt the whole shape of the last week rearrange itself around her like stone settling into a new wall. This had never been about Victor Ramsey. It had been about her. Gulnak had found her. He had followed the rumor of a Highcliff lawkeeper sent to a border quarry town, and rather than face her openly, he had done what cowards who could not win honest combat always did. He had struck sideways, at innocence, hoping to break the treaty that gave her purpose, hoping to see her clan turn on the humans she was sworn to keep honest peace with, hoping, perhaps, to see her own hands forced into condemning a man she now knew to be blameless. And the proof of it, this small carved token, was exactly the kind of evidence that could clear Victor Ramsey's name before the whole settlement. It was also exactly the kind of evidence that, reported honestly to the Highcliff clan council, would summon every warrior in 3 days' ride to hunt Gulnak Thornhide down, and would just as certainly draw him here, to Ashcrag, to finish what he had started, using the humans of the town as leverage against her the whole bloody way. She stood at the lip of the quarry pit as the sun came up over the cliffs, the bone token cold in her palm, and understood that she had a choice no lawkeeper was ever supposed to have to make. The letter of her duty, which said report everything to the council at once, or the truth of what she now knew in her own chest, which said that reporting it too soon, too loudly, might get Victor Ramsey killed before Gulnak ever showed his face. She did not go to the council that morning. She went instead back to Victor's workshop and found him already awake, sharpening a chisel by lamplight, and she set the small bone token down on his workbench between them without a word. He picked it up, turned it over, and went very still. "You know what this means. It means someone from my own clan's exiled dead is haunting this quarry," Adra said. "It means you were never a suspect. It means the man who killed Krug Stonejaw and tried to hang the blame on you did it to reach me, not you." "Then report it," Victor said. "Clear your name, clear mine, send for your clan." "If I report it now," Adra said low, "my clan will come in force and Gulnak will vanish into the high country the moment he hears warriors are riding, and he will come back for me another time, another place, when I am not braced for him, and he will use whatever he can find to hurt me on the way. You Mason, he will use you because he has already shown he is willing to. So what do you intend to do instead?" "I intend," Adra said, and heard her own voice shake very slightly for the first time in longer than she could remember, to keep you close enough that he cannot reach you without going through me first. Victor set the bone token down carefully on the workbench between them. Is that a professional judgment, Huntress, or a personal one? I do not know any more, Adra admitted, and it cost her more to say than any confession she had ever wrung from a guilty man. I came here to find out who killed Krug Stonejoe. I did not come here to find out that I would rather burn down my own duty than let harm come to the man I was investigating. The workshop was very quiet. Outside, the great quarry crane groaned as the first shift began to haul stone up from the pit, and somewhere below a bell rang the hour, and neither of them moved. Adra, Victor said, using her name for the first time since the scaffold had fallen, and something in the way he said it plain, unadorned, without honorific or fear, undid the last careful knot she had tied around her own heart. She crossed the small space between them and kissed him before either of them could think better of it, one hand fisted in the front of his shirt, the other still holding the small bone token that had just upended both their lives, and he kissed her back with a hunger that told her he had been fighting the same current for days and had simply been too proud or too frightened to say so first. When they broke apart, he was breathing hard, his forehead resting against hers, careful of her tusks in a way that made something in her chest ache. I was supposed to report you, she said against his mouth. I know. I am not going to. I know that too, he said and kissed her again. That night, Adra Highcliff, Huntress of the Highcliff clan, sworn lawkeeper, breaker of an exiled warlord's arm 9 years past, did not sleep in the hard chair by the workshop door. She went instead to Victor Ramsey's narrow bed above the workshop, and what passed between them there was neither gentle nor careful in the way that first kiss had been. It was fierce and searching, two strong wills finally allowed to stop pretending they did not want each other, her strength and his steadiness meeting somewhere in the dark and turning, slow and inevitable, into something molten. She traced the old scar on his throat with her mouth and felt him shudder beneath her hands. He mapped the long, pale line on her forearm with careful, reverent fingers as though it were something precious rather than a wound, and when at last they lay tangled together in the gray hour before dawn, sweat-slicked and spent and unwilling to move an inch away from one another, Adra understood that whatever came next, Gulnak Thornhide, the clan council, the whole weight of two people's uneasy peace, she was not walking away from this man. She had reported to his bed instead of to her own clan, and she did not regret it, not even a little, not even knowing what it would cost her to keep that secret once Gulnak forced her hand. The days that followed were stolen ones, and both of them knew it. They could not be seen too openly together, not yet. Not with the investigation still officially unresolved in the town's eyes and Adra's report to her clan council still, technically, overdue. But stolen time has its own sweetness, and Adra found herself inventing reasons to walk the terraces at his side, to sit in his workshop past the hour any investigation required, to press her mouth to his in the shadow of the stone bridges when no one was crossing. She helped him haul block and check rope, her orc strength making short work of tasks that took him twice as long alone, and he taught her, in turn, the particular music of stone, how to read a crack before it spread, how to judge a wall's true strength by the sound it made under a hammer's tap. You could have been a mason, he told her once, watching her set a keystone into a repaired archway with more care than most humans managed after years of training. I was raised to read men, not stone, she said, but I confess I like this better some days. Stone does not lie to you. It only tells you the truth about itself if you know how to listen. That sounds like something a lawkeeper would say. It is something a lawkeeper would say, she agreed. About a man she has decided she trusts more than she has trusted anyone in 9 years. He caught her hand where it rested on the warm stone and pressed his mouth to her scarred forearm, right over the old pale line Gulnak Thornhide had left there 9 years past, and she felt that small, deliberate tenderness settle into her chest like a coal banked for a long winter. But peace, in a border quarry town built on an old and uneasy treaty, was never a thing that lasted long unexamined. It was Reeve Alden Voss, the town's chief administrator, who forced the reckoning, though he did not know whose hand truly guided him to it. Voss had never liked the Highcliff presence in his town, tolerated it, as the treaty demanded, but never liked it. And when 3 weeks passed with no formal clan judgment delivered on Crug Stonejo's death, his patience, like the crowds before it, ran thin. Nearly a month, Voss announced from the steps of the town hall, a squat stone building on the third terrace, to a crowd that had gathered at his summons on market day, when both human and orc traffic filled the terraces thickest. Nearly a month, and the Highcliff Huntress sent to judge this matter has delivered no verdict, made no report to her own clan council, and has instead, he paused for effect, and Adra, standing at the edge of the crowd with a basket of nails she had been carrying for Victor, felt her stomach drop before he even finished the sentence. Been seen sharing the Mason Ramsey's bed near every night for a fortnight. I ask you all, is that justice, or is that a huntress who has been bought with something other than coin? The crowd's murmur rose fast and ugly. Adra saw Victor, 3 stalls down, go rigid, saw his hand drop instinctively toward the mason's hammer at his belt, saw him start forward with no plan at all except to stand beside her, which was so exactly, achingly like him that it nearly broke her heart before the humiliation of the moment had even fully landed. "Do not," she said, low and sharp, catching his eye across the crowd, and he stopped, jaw tight, though every line of his body strained toward her. She set down the basket of nails and walked forward instead, alone, into the center of the gathering crowd, and let Reeve Voss's accusation hang in the open air where everyone could see her face it. "You accuse me of corruption," she said, loud enough to carry to the crowd's furthest edge. "Say it plainly, Reeve, so there is no mistake in what you mean." Voss straightened, emboldened by her calm, mistaking it for weakness. "I say a Highcliff lawkeeper has taken a suspect to her bed rather than deliver judgment on him, and that her clan council deserves to know it before this town suffers further for her delay." "Careful," Adra said. "You are accusing a sworn officer of the Highcliff clan of dereliction before witnesses. That is itself a matter for clan law, and clan law does not treat false accusation gently." "Then prove it false," Voss shot back, and the crowd, hungry for spectacle, pressed closer. "Prove Ramsey innocent, prove your own judgment untainted, or admit you have betrayed the very law you were sent here to keep." It was, Adra realized with a cold, clear certainty, exactly the trap Gulnak Thornhide had wanted sprung, though he had not needed to lift a finger to spring it himself. He had only needed to wait for the town's own fear and prejudice to do the work, and for a small, jealous administrator to light the fuse. Wherever Gulnak was watching from, and she did not doubt for a moment that he was watching, he would be savoring this. She could feel the weight of every eye on the terrace, human faces twisted with suspicion. A scattering of orc quarry workers watching with the particular stillness of people waiting to see which way a huntress's honor would break, and Victor's face among them all, pale beneath the quarry dust, radiating a helpless fury at his own inability to shield her from this the way she had once shielded him. Adra Highcliff had faced down mobs before. She had never faced one that had already guessed correctly at the truth of her own heart. "You want proof," she said, and her voice did not shake. "You shall have it. Not proof of my innocence, Reeve Voss, proof of who truly killed Crug Stonejo, and why, and you will have it before this sun sets, in front of every soul on this terrace, because the man responsible for that death is coming here regardless of what I do or say, and I would rather he find us ready than find us tearing each other apart over a lie he planted on purpose." "What lie?" Voss demanded, wrong-footed. "The lie that a mason cut his own scaffold," Adra said. "The lie that a huntress's heart is a weakness to be used against her. Both were planted by the same hand, Reeve, and that hand belongs to an exiled warlord named Gulnak Thornhide, who has hunted me for 9 years and who has now followed me to your town to use your fear as a weapon." A murmur of unease rippled through the crowd at the name, half of them recognizing it from old stories of clan wars, half of them simply recognizing the cold certainty in Adra's voice. "Prove it," Voss said again, though with considerably less confidence. "I intend to," Adra said. "But not with words. Gulnak will not answer to words. He never has." It was as though her declaration had summoned him. A horn sounded from the cliff road above the settlement. Not a town horn, but a deep, harsh clan war horn that every orc on the terrace recognized instantly, and every human flinched from without understanding why. Adra's head snapped up, and there, silhouetted on the high ridge road above Ashcrag where the cliff path wound down toward the settlement's uppermost terrace, stood a broad-shouldered orc in dark battle leathers, flanked by 6 warriors of his own broken warband, the jagged broken-tusk sigil painted in white across his chest. Gulnak Thornhide had not come to hide any longer. He had come to be seen. "Highcliff Huntress," his voice boomed down across the terraces, carrying easily over the pit's echo. "I heard you had made yourself a plaything of these stone-eating vermin. I did not believe it until I saw it with my own eyes. Come and answer for the shame you have brought your clan, or I will bring this whole cliff down around your humans' ears and answer it for you." The crowd scattered into panic at the sight of armed warriors on the ridge, but Adra did not move, and Victor was suddenly at her side despite every warning she had given him, his hammer in hand, his jaw set with a fear he did not let touch his voice. "Tell me what you need," he said. "I need you to trust me," Adra said, already unbuckling the coil of climbing rope from her shoulder, her mind racing through the quarry's architecture the way Gulnak's warband could never hope to. "And I need everyone off the central bridge. Now." She turned to the fleeing crowd and roared the order in a voice that cracked like a whip, and enough of them obeyed out of pure animal instinct that the central stone bridge, the one arching directly over the deepest part of the quarry pit, the one linking the terrace where Gulnak's men would have to cross to reach the settlement proper, cleared within moments, leaving only Adra, Victor, and Reeve Voss, too stunned by fear to run, huddled at its edge. Gulnak did not wait for an invitation. He and his 6 warriors came down the cliff road at a dead run, boots ringing on stone, and reached the far end of the bridge just as Adra stepped onto its center span alone, her twin hand axes drawn, her braid whipping in the wind funneling up from the pit below. "This is between us, Gulnak," she called across the span. "It always was. You do not need to hurt anyone else to reach me. I am right here." "You dishonored yourself with a human," Gulnak spat, advancing onto the bridge, his warband fanning out behind him. "You dishonored the judgment you passed on me 9 years ago. I do not need clan law to settle this anymore, Highcliff. I only need your death and theirs to prove which of us the mountain truly favors." "Then come and take it," Adra said, "if you can still fight without cutting ropes in the dark like a coward." The insult landed exactly as she intended. Gulnak roared and charged the bridge alone, ahead of his warband, pride overriding caution, and Adra met him at the span's midpoint in a clash of axe and blade that sent sparks skittering off into the empty air over the pit. She fought him with everything 9 years of lawkeeping had honed in her: precise, economical, merciless. And for every strike he threw with the wild fury of 9 years of nursed hatred, she answered with the cold clarity of a woman who had made her peace, at last, with exactly what and who she was fighting for. But Gulnak was strong, and desperate men fight harder than proud ones, and when his warband saw their leader beginning to falter, 2 of them broke ranks and started onto the bridge to flank her. That was when Victor Ramsey did the only thing he could think to do that might actually matter. He had spent 11 years learning exactly how much weight a rope could bear, exactly where a beam would give, exactly how a structure failed when its balance was disturbed. He had watched, 3 weeks ago, as a scaffold came down because someone who understood stone and rope had turned that understanding into a weapon. He understood now, standing at the bridge's edge with Reeve Voss frozen useless beside him, that he could turn that same understanding the other way. The great quarry crane stood at the near end of the bridge, its counterweight a massive block of unhewn granite suspended on a chain directly above the span's support pillar. Victor had inspected that crane 100 times. He knew exactly which release pin held the counterweight steady, and exactly what would happen to the bridge's balance if that weight dropped at the wrong moment onto the wrong side of the central pillar. Not enough to collapse the bridge itself, which was built too solidly for that, but enough to send a violent shudder through the whole span, exactly the kind of shudder that would throw off the footing of anyone not braced for it. "Adra!" he shouted across the chaos of clashing steel. When I say brace against the near rail, she did not ask why. 9 years of trusting her own judgment had taught her when to trust someone else's, and in the space of a heartbeat, she threw herself sideways against the bridge's stone rail exactly as Victor drove the crane's release pin free with a single hammer blow. The counterweight dropped. The bridge shuddered like a living thing, a violent lurch that sent Gulnak's 2 flanking warriors sprawling off their feet, one of them pitching hard against the rail, the other stumbling to his knees at the exact moment Adra, braced and ready, spun back into the fight with the full weight of her orc strength behind her axe. She did not kill Gulnak. Clan law, even now, held her hand from that, but she disarmed him with a strike that shattered the bone in his sword arm exactly as she had broken it 9 years before, and put him on his knees at the center of the bridge in full view of the terrified, watching crowd that had crept back to the terrace edges to see, and shouted, in a voice that carried across the whole quarry and echoed off the cliff walls on both sides, words that every orc and human present would repeat for years afterward. 9 years ago, I judged you exiled for breaking a truce and killing under parley. You did not accept that judgment then, and you have spent 9 years trying to make me regret passing it. I do not regret it, Gulnak Thornhide. I regret only that it took me this long to be certain what I was defending when I did. She planted her boot against his chest and forced him flat against the stone, her axe at his throat, and looked up at the frightened crowd on both terraces, human faces and orc faces alike, all of them watching in absolute silence. This man murdered Krug Stonejaw and framed an innocent human mason for it, hoping to break the treaty that keeps this town alive and drag my clan into a war none of us want. That is the truth. I will swear it before the Highcliff clan council myself, and I will swear before them too, that Victor Ramsey is the most honest man I have ever judged, and that whatever I feel for him is no dereliction of my duty, but the clearest thing my duty has ever shown me. The silence that followed was so total that Adra could hear the wind moving through the pit below. It was Victor who broke it, crossing the bridge to stand beside her despite the 2 remaining warband members still on their feet, his hammer loose in his hand but his eyes only on her. "You did not have to say that part," he said quietly, for her ears alone. "Yes," Adra said, not looking away from Gulnak's furious, defeated face beneath her boot. "I did." The remaining warband members, seeing their leader broken and disarmed, and their whole scheme laid bare before witnesses from both peoples, threw down their weapons rather than face Highcliff justice alone. Reeve Voss, pale and considerably humbled, was left standing at the bridge's edge with nothing left to accuse anyone of. It took 3 more days for the formal reckoning to unfold, and Adra insisted, over Victor's protest, on doing it exactly by the book this time, because she understood better than anyone that a truth won by force still needed to be sealed by law to truly hold. She sent word up the cliff roads by the fastest runner in Ashcrag, and 4 days later a full delegation of the Highcliff clan council arrived at the settlement. 3 gray-haired elders, and at their head, a broad, iron-braided matriarch named Adra Highcliff, Adra's own aunt and the clan's senior lawspeaker, a woman whose judgment had settled blood feuds across half the border country, and who did not suffer fools, liars, or, Adra suspected with some dread, wayward nieces gladly. The council convened on the central bridge itself, the same span where Gulnak had fallen, with the whole settlement gathered on both terraces to watch, human and orc alike, the treaty itself hanging, unspoken, over every word that would be said. Adra Highcliff listened to the full accounting, the bone token found in the wreckage, the cut ropes on 2 separate scaffolds, Gulnak's own confession dragged from him under clan questioning, since even exiled warlords could not lie forever under a lawspeaker's formal interrogation, that he had planned the sabotage specifically to force Adra into an impossible choice between duty and mercy. "You did not report your suspicions to this council the moment you found that token," Adra said at last, her voice carrying the particular flatness of a woman deciding how much trouble to make for family. "That is a serious breach, niece." "It is," Adra agreed, standing straight back before her aunt with Victor at her side, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, close enough that the whole gathered crowd could see exactly what she was choosing not to hide. "I judged that reporting it too soon would draw Gulnak into open war before I could disarm him safely, and that reporting it honestly meant admitting, in the same breath, that I had already given my heart to the man he meant to use against me. I chose to protect this town and this man first, and answer for the breach after. I will accept whatever judgment this council sees fit to pass on me for it." Adra Highcliff studied her niece for a long, silent moment, and then looked past her to Victor Ramsey, taking his measure with the same unhurried thoroughness Adra herself had once turned on him in his own workshop. "You are the mason," Adra said. "I am elder," Victor said, and did not flinch from her gaze, though every human on the terrace watched him with held breath. "My niece has broken clan protocol for you, broken 9 years of discipline, stood on this bridge and called a Huntress's oath and a woman's heart the same truth in front of 2 peoples who have spent longer hating each other than loving each other." Vraka's yellow eyes narrowed. "Tell me why you were worth that mason, and tell me honestly, because I will know if you are not." Victor was quiet a moment, and Adra felt her own heart hammering harder than it had during the fight on the bridge, because this, she understood, was the true reckoning, not the one about Gulnak, but the one that would decide whether she was allowed to keep what she had found. "I am not worth anything special, elder," Victor said finally. "I am a stonemason. I build walls and wells and bridges for people who mostly do not thank me for it, and I have done it alone for 11 years because I never expected anyone to want to stand beside me while I did. Adra did not choose me because I was worth some great prize. She chose me, I think, because I never once treated her differently whether she was standing in front of a mob or sitting alone in my workshop at midnight. That is the only thing I know how to offer anyone, elder. The same hands, the same patience, whether the whole town is watching or no one is watching at all. If that is not worth what she broke for me, then I do not know what would be, and I will not insult either of you by pretending otherwise." The silence on the bridge stretched long enough that Adra thought she might have to speak into it herself, but it was Adra Highcliff who broke it at last, with something that might, on a less formidable face, have been called the ghost of a smile. "That," the old law-speaker said, "is the only answer I would have accepted." She turned back to Adra. "Your breach of protocol stands, niece, and will be noted. But the treaty that binds this town survives because of what you did, not despite it, and I will not pretend a rule matters more than the peace it exists to protect. You are still Highcliff's Huntress, if you still wish to be. And it is the judgment of this council, and my own judgment as your kin, that whatever bond you have made with this mason is yours to keep openly, without further shame from this clan or, God's help them, from this town." The crowd on both terraces let out a breath Adra had not realized they were all holding, and somewhere among the human onlookers she heard, unmistakably, the sound of Reeve Voss clearing his throat and finding, for once in his life, absolutely nothing to say. Gulnak Thornhide and his surviving warband were bound over for formal clan exile a second time, this time permanent and enforced by a warband escort that would see him march to the farthest edge of Highcliff territory and left there, arm still splinted, honor finally and irrevocably broken. He said nothing further as they led him away, and Adra found she did not need him to. 9 years of watching her own shoulder for him had come to an end on a bridge over a quarry pit, and she felt the absence of that old weight like a held breath finally released. That evening, as the settlement's fear finally began to soften into something like celebration, quarry workers, breaking open barrels of ale they had been saving for the autumn festival, orc warriors and human masons standing shoulder to shoulder at bonfires along the terraces in a way Ashcrag had not seen since the treaty was first signed. Adra found Victor exactly where she had first truly seen him weeks before, kneeling in the dust at the terrace's edge. This time not tending a wound, but simply watching the fires below with the particular stillness of a man, still absorbing the fact that his life had changed shape without warning. She sat down beside him without ceremony, her leathers dusty from the day's long reckoning, her braid coming loose from its iron rings, and for a long moment neither of them said anything at all. "Your aunt terrifies me considerably more than Gulnak ever did," Victor said eventually. "She terrifies most people. It is why she has kept the peace along this border for 30 years. Adra leaned her head against his shoulder, an easy, unguarded gesture she would not have permitted herself a month ago in front of anyone. "You did well by her, better than I expected, and I did not expect little. I only told her the truth." "I know," Adra said. "That is precisely why it worked." Below them, the bonfires threw long shadows up the cliff face, and somewhere a quarry worker had produced a fiddle and was playing something rough and cheerful that neither human nor orc music alone could quite account for, a tune born, like the town itself, from two peoples learning slowly how to share the same hard ground. "I have been thinking," Victor said, "about what happens now. You are still Highcliff's lawkeeper. There will be other towns, other disputes, other places your clan needs you." "There will," Adra agreed. "I am a stonemason, my work is here mostly. The wells I have started, the wall along the third terrace that still wants finishing, 11 years of half-built things I would not leave unfinished even for you. I know that too. So what does this become, Adra? I am not asking to trap you. I am asking because I do not want to spend it wondering." She sat up and looked at him properly then. This quiet, steady man who had never once, in all the weeks she had known him, asked her to be smaller or softer or less than exactly what she was, who had built his whole life around the patient work of making things that held weight without breaking. And she understood, with a certainty that settled into her chest like a keystone finding its place, precisely what she wanted to answer him with. "Highcliff Huntresses do not marry the way your people marry," she said. "We do not need a priest's blessing or a written contract. We mark what we claim, and we claim what we mean to keep, and every soul in this clan who sees the mark knows exactly what it means without a single word needing to be spoken." She reached for the small belt knife at her hip, the same one she used for cutting climbing rope, and held it out to him, hilt first. "It is your choice to make as much as mine, Mason. I do not ask this of men who have not earned the right to refuse me." Victor looked at the knife, then at her, understanding dawning slow and sure across his face. "Tell me what it requires." "A mark given freely, that I will carry for the rest of my life exactly the way I carry the scar Gulnak gave me 9 years ago, except this one I will tell the story of gladly, every single time anyone asks, for as long as I live." She held his gaze, fierce and unguarded all at once. "I am not asking you to change what you are, Victor Ramsey. I am asking you to let me keep what I have already found. Whatever that costs either of us, whatever towns still look at us sideways, whatever it means for a Highcliff Huntress to stand beside a human mason in the open, in daylight, with no more nights spent worrying who might be watching." He took the knife from her hand, his fingers steady despite the weight of what he was about to do, and drew the blade, careful and shallow, along the outside of her forearm just above the old pale scar Gulnak had left there. A thin new line that would heal in time, into something she would carry the rest of her life as proudly as any wound she had earned in 9 years of lawkeeping. "There," he said quietly, when it was done, pressing a strip of clean cloth against it with the same gentle, unhurried care she had watched him show a frightened old woman weeks before, the same tenderness he had never once known she was witness to until it was too late for either of them to pretend they had not already fallen. "Now you will have to tell people the truth of that one too." "I intend to," Adra said, and kissed him there on the terrace's edge, in full view of the bonfires and the fiddle music and the whole settlement of Ashcrag, human and orc alike, none of whom so much as blinked at the sight, because whatever prejudice had once stood between their two peoples had been burned away, at least here, at least on this cliff, by a bridge that had held and a truth that had finally been spoken aloud where everyone could hear it. The following spring, when the treaty between Ashcrag and the Highcliff clan came up for its customary renewal, it was signed not only by Reeve Voss and Elder Vraka Highcliff, but, at the insistence of both parties, by Adra Highcliff and Victor Ramsey as well, their two names inked side by side at the bottom of the parchment as living proof that the peace between their peoples could hold not just in law, but in love, openly. On a cliffside quarry where cranes still swung and bridges still stood, and a huntress who had once refused to report the man she loved to her clan had instead built, stone by stone alongside him, a life neither of them would ever again have to hide.